This video was produced specifically to pay tribute to a dear friend of mine, a very renowned individual, Alan Skillcole. Today, before I briefly introduce myself to you, the viewer, and before I relate some key, interesting, heroic saga of a friendship that began not in a stadium under bright lights, as you would imagine, but in the vulnerable, fragile cradle of an infant school way back in January 1956. Please allow me to establish some protocols. Firstly, I would like to welcome you, the viewer, for selecting to watch this video, and hopefully boredom doesn't lure your interest away before the end, and that you will not only watch it to the end, but that you will watch and watch and watch it repeatedly. A little bit about myself. I'm a degreed licensed professional engineer with over 35 years in the energy industry, nuclear energy industry. And I've got publications with the U.S. Department of Energy, quarterly newsletter, Energy Matters. I have managed the technical and procurement aspects of multi-million-dollar projects. I have developed community citywide youth sports soccer program. Initially, first season, we had just 23 kids, and I almost single-handedly nurtured the program through an explosive growth up to over 290 kids and 28 teams. Along the way, I discovered I was doing way too much by myself, so I recruited many very devoted, dedicated parents who, of course, wanted to see their kids that they had signed up play soccer. So I recruited many of the parents. I went and got licensed, certified as a coach, who can give coaching classes to certified parents, and also to get a referee license. That community soccer program lured many interesting kids. Of note, a few kids I was able to arrange Division I tryouts in soccer. Some were offered full scholarships, others were offered partial scholarship. Two notable players in that program need to be mentioned. First, signing up at the age of 4, Satara Murray, Jamaican ancestry. She was lightning fast. I made an arrangement for her to try out. She got a full scholarship to one of the top women's college soccer program, North Carolina. She later went on to play professional in the United States, and Satara, coming out of my youth soccer program, signed a contract with Liverpool Women's Club. Eventually, Satara was in the Reggae Girls setup and was on the brink of being included in the squad to compete in the 2023 World Cup in Australia and New Zealand. Unfortunately, she had some injury problems and did not make the final squad. Another notable young lady joined again at the age of 4, this time of Panamanian ancestry. I contacted the Panamanian Football Federation, got a tryout for this young lady, Karina Baltrip Reyes. She made the Panamanian team, and Karina performed in the 2023 Women's World Cup staged in New Zealand, Australia. I also formed some homework type facility in the Austin area, where middle school kids could come, and I would recruit City of Austin, my employer, recruit some of my co-workers to help these kids in their homework. So in addition to being an engineer, I was conducting the soccer program in the evenings after working full-time as an engineer. I wasn't just a full-time regular soccer coach like most soccer coaches are that you've read of. So full-time engineering, soccer in the evening, um, and last but not least, I left Jamaica after graduating in 1967 from St. George's College, SDGC. Um, I played for Cavalier in the Premier League, and I was a member of the Jamaica national under 20 team that won a bronze medal in Havana, Cuba, behind silver medalist Cuba and gold medalist Mexico. But enough about me. And my name is Mike Davey, by the way. But enough about me. When Alan Cole's dad registered him in Alpha Infant School in early January 1956, Alan's dad was dutifully, mainly adhering to two key life elements or life principles that were the bedrock of Alpha Infant School. It's a Catholic institution, and Alan's dad was focused on the education of Alan and also discipline. Um, in order to facilitate your viewing and hopefully repeated viewing, I have structured my delivery here today, paying tribute to Alan, by chronological order, delivering, recounting life happenstances, life events, teachers, classmates, in-class dynamics, playground antics, and notable experiences and notable individuals. So I will follow that order. Again, chronologically, recounting life happenstances, what was going on in Alan's life, his teachers, classmates, what was happening in class, what was happening on the playground that served to develop such a wondrous, incredible talent. You will hear me utter and mention names of some notable people from other sports, notable people from other sports other than soccer, and from other aspects of life besides sports. Now, your insight that you might gain or you might wish to explore would be the answer to the question: did Alan's presence, all that he achieved, but did his presence at that young age rub off on these other individuals, making them notable? Or did these notable individuals, by attending the same school as Alan, rubbing shoulders with Alan, did they influence and contribute to the incredible success that Alan achieved? Okay. Um, oh, I should mention, after graduating from Howard University, I received a soccer scholarship to Howard University. There I earned my engineering degree, and shortly after, I was officed on 86th floor, Tower Number 2, World Trade Center. Again, enough about me. In January 1955, Alan's dad first registered him at Alpha Infant School. Alpha Infant School is on South Camp Road, just across from Savannah Park. Alan enters Miss Royal's class, very good teacher. In class, the students are introduced, Alan is introduced mostly hands-on instructions, not much writing at first, but also quite a lot of emphasis on playground and fun, especially on the sliders. And Alan had fun, looking forward to going to the playground. No soccer, certainly not organized, is played in Miss Royal's class. Some kids may be led by Alan, who had some instincts to lead even from a very young age. Some kids would crumple up notebook paper, would crumple up paper bags, shaping it as round as possible and kicking it, just kicking it around. Of note, though I didn't note until I was registered in January 1956. Alan's dad registered him in January 1955. I was registered in 1956. But I immediately noticed that Miss Royals Miss Royal's daughter, Tabby, a breathtakingly beautiful Tabby, she wanted to be partners with Alan. Whenever we were at recess, the entire school went out for recess. Tabby gravitated towards Alan for the games where you need to be a partner in catching, you play catching the ball or trying to get tagged or playing baseball. Um, Even then, Alan had those good looks, the same good looks he has. He kept all the way through his life. He was somewhat taller than most of the kids. He had a somewhat magnetic personality, but this is something I reflected on and an insight that I peered into the past to sort of, pick up and clue to. Alan talked quite a lot. In that year, January 1955, an older brother of mine and Donald Billy Perkins was a future national soccer player. My brother and Donald Billy Perkins was a year ahead of Alan, and I had a sister who was 3 years ahead of Alan. So in 1956, my dad registered me, and I'm placed in Miss Royal's class, and of course, Alan moves up to Miss Witter's class. In Miss Witter's class, there is some more focus, a little bit more direction to the in-class lessons, but nothing too strenuous or forceful. Playground is still mixed in quite a lot in 1956. Now, notable individuals already rubbing shoulders with Alan. Mrs. Witter had two sons. Both of them went to Alpha Infant School, went to Alpha Primary School, one full scholarship to St. George's College, and one of them, the younger one, eventually made the St. George's College Champs team and participated at Champs. So they are Champs participant, rubbing shoulders with small, young, tender Alan at such a tender age. 1957, Alan is promoted, moves up as Jamaicans say. Alan is promoted to Mrs. Myrtle Barrett's class. Some amount of structure is infused in the daily lessons, and direction in lessons was a little bit more concerted, as was age appropriate at the time. Playground and recess are a little bit more segmented, and two of Miss Barrett's son, notability, two of Miss Barrett's son, Dale, Eric, notably became outstanding athletes. Dale eventually played soccer and improved good enough to be a goalkeeper on the Malines FC, Malines Football Club, Division II team in 1968. Now, Eric was a totally otherworldly situation. Eric with Mrs. Myrtle Barry, this is Alan's teacher in 1957. Miss Myrtle Barrett's husband, E.V. Barrett, had participated in Champs and had won a few events, contributed to the team victory of Wolmer's, and also, incredibly, he had defeated the great Herb McKinley in an event back in Champs. And you can double check me on that in the Champs 100 yearbook. Eric had etched his name in the Champs book as having equaled or established a record in all three class divisions. I think maybe only the great Don Quarry may have done that. In any event, Eric's more accomplished feat in boys championships was he scampered down the track 100 yards in 10.1 seconds. That 10.1 seconds time, keep that in mind, 10.1 seconds. Eric Barrett, Mrs. Barrett's son. By clocking 10.1, Eric had removed, erased, deleted 4 legendary, iconic Champs participants. First was Mauricio Ventura, who had set the class record at 10.2 in 1957. Second was Lennox Billy Miller, who had equaled it from Kingston College in 1962. Then in 1967, Donald Quarry from Camperdown had equaled that 10.2 seconds. And finally, Godfrey Murray, a teammate of Donald Quarry at Camperdown, had also run 10.2. Eric Barrett removed all four legendary iconic names from the champs record book. And Eric Barrett was rubbing shoulders with Alan from the tender age of, let's see, Alan was 2 years ahead of Eric, so, 7, 8, 9. Now, Miller, Quarry, and Murray later on became Olympians and participated in the Olympics for Jamaica. In Miss Barrett's class, grades and rankings were first introduced, and Alan placed in the top 1%. I think he probably came first in his class. And those type of performances in class was repeated by Alan throughout his tenure at Alpha Infant and also at Alpha Junior. Very little, if any, organized soccer. Still just Alan and some of the guys rolling up whatever paper they could find, trying to get it as round as possible and kicking it around. 1957. So 1958, Alan moves over from Alpha Infant, one side of the street, across the street, to Alpha Primary or Alpha Junior. The head mistress at Alpha Junior / Primary, Sister Mechtil, was elderly, and I think after a year or so she passed away, and Sister Agatha became head mistress of Alpha Junior and also Alpha Infant. And for most of Alan's time and my time at Alpha Junior was head mistress was Sister Agatha. So in 1958, Alan moves over to Alpha Junior School from Alpha Infant, larger physically environment. Whether it was this jump to higher frames of references, or whether it was his physical growth, whether it was his superior height, his raw superior speed, faster than most of the kids, his outspoken, outgoing demeanor, much more so than the typical 7-year-old. Whether it was those things that was brought on by the move from infant to junior, Alan felt like he was, big, or he was a bigger boy than the kids over in infant school. Whatever that did to his mind, he acted sort of more like a senior to us, and because of his height, I think a lot of the students that were in 3A, 4A, 5A, the classes ahead of Alan, I think they mistakenly sometimes just thought Alan was one of them and grouped him in with them. And so Alan, he didn't look down on us, the kids below him or the kids in his class, but he gravitated towards the older, taller, larger, stronger kids. There's an increased emphasis on arithmetic. Miss Anderson introduces a class band. Recess and lunch places kids now, unlike Alpha Infant School, on larger areas, and Alan's height and talk endears him to the older kids. His instincts and natural tendencies are challenged, directed and shortened and enhanced by him now tangling with older playmates, older schoolmates. 2 to 3 years, sometimes his senior. This increased challenge brought out more and more instinctive, latent, evasive moves, ways to get past opponents. In some cases in those days, we had two teams, we would pick two teams, two goalkeepers, and play a competitive A side versus B side. At other times, maybe 50-50, we played a sort of World Cup format. For those not familiar with the World Cup format, it's every man for himself. So it's the ball is thrown up in the air, everybody rushes to it, and you try to pop your way until you come. And in those days, we use small goals. When we embrace the World Cup format, we use small goals. So if you were not skillful enough to beat or pop or block a man, you would lose the ball and somebody else would get it. And there's no passing. No, what this encouraged was you had to be making your chops and your cuts and your pops. You had to be making it more closer to your body and further away from the opposing player. Or if you cut it or chop it too long, it would run off and you would lose it. So as we and Alan, of course, tried to cut and chop and pop, Alan was doing it so close, beating it so tight that one kid or some kid had heard at the playground in his neighborhood that Alan is inching the man. Alan, inch your boy, you can't stop him. Anyway, there's a quantum leap in Alan's technique and speed in handling the ball during this year. Remember, Alan is 7 for most of the year, didn't turn 8 until October. From that point in time, 1958, looking back, one could tell, you could tell, right? I had to have an insight and look back. You could tell that there was something special about that tall, skinny, good-looking red boy. In this year, in their final year of Alpha Primary, notable Patrick Potter Kirkwood, he of the KC 64-65 all-conquering Manning Cup teams. Potter Kirkwood was in 5A in the scholarship class his last year at Alpha. And can you imagine Potter coming down and Alan probably almost as tall as him, because Alan was very tall for his age. Potter calling Alan and say, hey, you would come and play with us. Another notable, not soccer, not even sport. Former Prime Minister Bruce Golding is a schoolmate of Alan and myself, rubbing shoulders with Alan, talking and what have you. Bruce Golding, former Prime Minister, eventually went through Alpha Primary, passed scholarship for St. George's College, STGC, and then I think for sixth form he transferred to JC. Let me speed up this with you. So next year, 1959, it's time for Miss Cornwall's class in 3A. And remember, there's also 4A, Miss Scott, and 5A, Miss Opson. Miss Opson is the scholarship class. In-class instructions were broadened and sectioned off into math, English, geography, history, civics by Mrs. Cornwall, and probably by the Ministry of Education. Miss Cornwall, like all teachers at Alpha, was brilliant, stern, emphasized excellence, and most importantly, emphasized worldliness. I still recall Miss Cornwall cutting out newspaper articles and assigning to each student in the class, and the assignment was you read it and be prepared to report on it the next day. The next day, Miss Cornwall would collect the newspaper articles and then ask you about, she would have written your name on top of the article. She would then call you to the top of the class, front of the class, and you had to say what did you read about, what does it mean to you, what does it mean to Jamaica, what does it mean to the world. This is 1959, so Alan was 8. All the kids were 8 most of that year, not turning 9 until October 1959. That's in class. Outside of class, at recess, lunchtime, and after school, girls mostly played hopscotch, baseball, and jump rope, while boys staged races, straightaway races, and races around the entire school. We also played cricket. There's always a classmate bringing a cork and tar ball. It's cork and tar, but we say cork and tar, all right? And somebody would find a piece of wood from the nearby gully. Incidentally, that gully that was adjacent to Alpha Junior was sometimes invaded by a group of I guess at-risk kids called the Mama Gang, MAU-MAU, the Mama Gang. Um, in running, Alan would invariably be among the leaders, if not winning the straightaway races and the races that went all the way around the school. In this class, we started to play more and more. We may have started earlier, but we started playing more and more See Well Lash or See Well Lash. You know, about 15 or 20 petals from this flower, um, tied together by a thread or a rubber band, and you try to keep it up on your feet, juggling on your feet. At first, we would race for 100, 200, 400, 500 with just one foot. When we got to 500 and almost 1,000, it became boring. I mean, Alan, of course, was way ahead, two or 300 um, tops above the best other student. After we went up to 500, 600, that was boring. So we started challenging each other to see if we can go all the way around the school. And of course, at first, even Alan himself would only get half away. But pretty soon, Alan, of course, was the first to go all the way around. Now, for the 3, 4, 500, use one foot. Going all the way to school, now you had to use both feet. So Alan was using both feet and keeping, juggling that, band of flowers all the way around the school. Did you think that those touches may have contributed to Alan's skill and mastery and control of the soccer ball? Maybe, just maybe, right? In any event, after school sessions, 8, 9-year-old would include players or students who had already passed through Alpha Junior, Alpha Primary. Players had passed through and had gone on to Holy Trinity if they did not gain a scholarship to one of the high schools, the grant-aided schools, or from KC or George's or even Woolmer's. So the students who had passed through Alpha Junior and had gone on to Kingston College, St. George's College, Calabar, Trinity, they would visit in the afternoon after school and they would play with and against us. So again, Alan is playing against 3, 4, 5 years older. And these kids seeing Alan, by that time, most of them had known him, but some of them forgot that, yeah, he's tall and everything, but he's several years behind, younger and several classes behind you. But that didn't stop them from roping in Alan. There were several of these kids who went on to represent the Jamaica national team, either at the juvenile level or the senior level. Alton Hilton, a smooth, scintillating dribbler. Carol Dos Smichael, a solid, sound defender. Glenford Luigi Davey, my brother, a goalkeeper. Daly, don't remember his first name, went on to be goalkeeper for Excelsior in the Manning Cup. Aside from football, one of Alan's schoolmates a year ahead of him was, well, a year with Alan was Thomas Mitchell, and Thomas Mitchell went on to St. George's and was 800-mile specialist. Next, Alan moved up to 1960 Miss Scott's class. Now this is a whole different ball game. In class, Alan absorbed the no more increasingly full-scale high school preparation material that Miss Scott was introducing us to. While he flourished in all subjects, just as he did in the lower classes, he had a particular affinity for math, which he grasped and mastered with ease. Miss Scott noted this and would give Alan some extra lessons to take home each evening. Alan would speed through, in math, would speed through the daily list of sums assigned to be worked on in class so quickly he would finish in less than half the time allotted. Now finished, and this is 1960, so Alan is 9 most of that year. What do you think a 9-year-old will do? He has finished his work, nothing left to do, lots of energy. He gets up out of his seat, Alan gets up out of his seat and walks around the class and starts helping the other students who were struggling to finish their maths. Miss Scott, of course, on the one hand, impressed with Alan's brilliance, but recognizing that she needs to have some semblance of order in her classroom, she struggled to rein in and also struggled to punish Alan, but did discourage him from leaving his seat almost every day. Now, here's something about Miss Scott. Miss Scott was 4A, and 5A was a scholarship class. So Miss Scott would walk around the schoolyard with her cane, and she would be flashing her cane against her own calf, her own leg, as if she was practicing for when she would really need to apply some discipline to one of the students, usually a male. Miss Scott was very strict, very serious, but she was fair. Miss Scott was so feared that several students, don't ask me how, made arrangements to bypass Miss Scott's class. How did they do that? When they left 3A, instead of going into 4A, keeping in the A stream, they got routed to 4B. Miss Scott was 4A. Then when they went up to fifth grade, they went back into the A stream, 5A, Miss Hobson. Don't ask me how some of these kids do it. I think some of them may have had a parent who had some special relationship with Sister Agatha or with some of the other Alpha administrators. But yeah, students feared Miss Scott so much that they deliberately seek to bypass Miss Scott, then come back to Miss Hobson. Classroom. On the field, Alan continued to blossom, and even when much older former students continued to visit, Alan would still stand out, inching by players before scoring with some pile driver shots or far corner placements. 1961, Alan is moved up to 5A. 5A is scholarship class. Miss Hobson. Esteem. It's upstairs. You have made it. It's scholarship class. Tough as Miss Hobson was, she also doled out some special rewards. One such reward was high test scores merited some minutes on the balcony. This is upstairs. You score high in your test, you get to go and spend 15, 20, 30 minutes on the balcony overlooking Sabina Park, where you could watch test cricket, you could watch boys champs, or you could watch the early Manning Cup games. And as you can imagine, only 5A students could do that. Now, next door to Miss Hobson was 5B, and they had a banister or a balcony on their 5B exit, and also a stairwell on that side. So those kids also could go and look over at Sabina. Now, when you're watching a soccer game from your perch, as soon as the game is over and class is over for the day, guess what you want to do when you go on the playground? You want to try everything you saw in the Manning Cup. You see Dennis Barnett or Dennis Zadie dribbling, you want to go on the field and dribble. And Alan tried to dribble as much as he did. Not much passing, for sure. Notable, tracking along with Alan all along. I choose no because they're at scholarship level and they're about to divert from each other. Their paths are about to divert. But tracking along with Alan was Lennox Robinson. Notable because of he won a scholarship to St. George's. Alan won a scholarship to Kingston College. Lennox made the St. George's sports team in football, cricket, and in track and field. In track and field, Lennox Robinson was part of a relay team that set a champs record in the class 3 4 by 100 yards record, 4 by 110 yards record. Alan also went on to play cricket, sunlight cricket for Georges, and also Manning Cup football. And in 1967, Lennox Robinson was selected for the All Manning team. So after high school, Lennox received a full scholarship, soccer scholarship to Michigan State, where he excelled. And Lennox is now engaged in a variety of business ventures and nation building activities. So there were some other notables, several of them who went on to represent Jamaica at the national senior level in football. And some of them, and some of them was in 5B, but they're in 5th level. A few of them were Kenneth Bob Campbell and Lloyd Malcolm Walker. Kenneth Bob Campbell went on to Veer Technical, went on to the Jamaica national senior team while still a teenager. Lloyd Malcolm Walker went on to Veer Technical also, and went on to Jamaica national senior team. Down in 4A with me, Alan is in 5A, I'm in 4A. With me in 4A are Norman Gutter Thompson, may his soul rest in peace. Bob Campbell, may his soul rest in peace. Errol E.B. Barrett, Michael Ashman, Michael and Maurice Ashman, and some other notable soccer players, most of whom went on to represent Jamaica at the national, juvenile and senior level. The Pierce brothers, Rudy, Donald, and Fabian. The Plummer brothers, Bobby and Derek. Derek Plummer, E of the Woolmer's 1971 Triple Crown Championship. Also I've mentioned soccer, not a particularly outstanding player while he was at Alpha, but pretty good in his own. Not a particularly outstanding player beyond Alpha or high school, but he rose to a level that superseded all of us as players, because as a referee, as a licensed referee, he rose to the level of a FIFA certified referee and refereed some very important CONCACAF World Cup elimination games. Winston Dirks Campbell, rest in peace. Let's see, Alan, myself, counting back. So about 4 years behind Alan is a champs legend, even more legendary perhaps than Eric Barrett was. Trevor T.C. Campbell was a classmate, was a schoolmate of Alan Cole. And Trevor Campbell won every individual race, maybe 14, 15 individual races at boys championships. He attended Halford Junior. Now, one morning I was dropped off at school by my dad. Alan's father had just dropped him off. I dropped him off earlier, and Alan would be perched on the handlebar, on the little, not the handlebar. He would be perched on the bar that comes across from the seat up to the handle. Alan's dad dropped him off earlier than I was dropped off. So by the time I got to school, I saw Alan and about 4 guys standing as if they were in lanes. And I saw in each lane where Alan and the 4 guys were, each column, there was about 10 kids equally spaced apart, maybe by about 5 yards apart. And they were crouched down and bent over. And when I got out of my father's car, I went in, I found out Alan had organized, almost single-handedly, a hurdles race. He had seen the 120-yard hurdles at Sabina Park the evening before from his perch on the balcony outside 5A. And Alan had somehow cajoled, coerced, begged the younger kids who probably idolized Alan, and it wasn't too difficult. But Alan had arranged um, columns of kids as hurdles and conducted a hurdle race at Halford Junior. Okay. Now, before I move, so Alan eventually is in Miss Hobson's class, 5A, and he takes and passes with flying colors common entrance and is awarded a scholarship to Kingston College. But what many may not know is Alan's father secretly yearned for Alan to um, to have won a scholarship and attend St. George's College. Why? Again, Alan's father relished the discipline and the emphasis on education. Not that Kingston College or any other school did, but also as important, Alan's father enjoyed and preferred the snappy, short, snappy ball passing formation that St. George's were drilled in by famed St. George's coach Arthur Mac Mackenzie. Alan's dad just loved the way St. George's played and yearned for Alan to play. But Casey was just, just across the street, so he was okay with that. Now, some other notables before so Alan Parsons at Casey. But before I leave Alpha and move on to Alan's high school years, another notable amongst our Alpha Junior classmates was Lloyd Bonnie Palmels, whose nation building services include a stint as director of the Sports Development Foundation in Jamaica. So Bonnie Palmels attended Alpha Junior, passed common entrance for St. George's College. Outside of football, some more notables, and I should have mentioned before that most all of the girls at Alpha Infant and Alpha Junior were very pretty young ladies. I say young ladies, well, young girls were very pretty girls. They weren't even 11, 12. They were, I guess, preteen at some point. So, in any event, beauty contest. Alpha Junior produced the gorgeous Audrey Dell, who was voted Miss Festival 1968 and thus the second runner-up to Miss Jamaica 1968. Right? Audrey Dell, third place in Miss Jamaica 1968. And then here comes Ava Gill, whose brother Philip was 1 year behind Alan. Philip's sister Ava Gill, Miss Jamaica 1971, and I think she was fifth in Miss World. So there were some notables. So again, I challenge you viewers to think about all these notables I've mentioned and go back, hopefully go back and play the video and jot down the name of the notables. Were their presence the contributing factor to Alan being such a wondrously gifted football player, or was Alan's outstanding achievement and his presence among them, was that the contributing factor to them gaining notability? Some food for thought. Okay, 1962 to 1964, Kingston College. Now, before Alan even reached Miss Hobson 5A, the students, Alan's fellow students, schoolmates, who had left Alpha Junior and gone on to Kingston College, Wolmer, St. George's, those kids had been ringing off the ear of the players and the kids and the coaches at St. George's at KC, and they were talking to the coach at KC, the coach at George's, coach at Wolmer's, talking to these coaches and telling them about this kid. He's still in primary school, and we've got to find a way to get him into our school. So all the players and coaches at the coach level know about Alan while he was still at Alpha Junior. So Alan eventually went to KC, matriculated to KC in 1962, first form, Um, Pato, of course, immediately snatched him up and brought him out to the Colts coach. And at first form, Alan was practicing with the Colts team. And I think he might have played in a few games. But by second form, 1963, most of that year Alan was 12. Colts is under 14 at that time. Alan was 12 most of that year. Alan was starting on the Colts team. And there was a Colts game, a famous Colts game, between the St. George's College Colts team and the Kingston College Colts team. The St. George's College Colts team included Russell Bell, who was, doing the same thing to Alan and claiming the same type of notoriety as a boy wonder. Well, when Casey met St. George's, the crowd for a Colts game approached the crowd for most Manning Cup games. There was so much crowd that the school had to call police to keep additional fans from trying to force their way in. I don't recall the score of that game, but that was a tremendous game. In 1964, 1965, no, in 1964, there was an incident that sort of reshaped Alan's life somewhat. As a result of the incident, Alan was sort of compelled to leave Kingston College back like early 64, mid 64, which was a sad loss for Kingston College. Alan spent a few years after leaving Kingston College at Campion, and then he was swept up in that big exodus of corporate area kids onto Veer Technical by Derek Tompkinson, a famed British coach. Derek Tompkinson had coached the Jamaica College team to the 61, 62, 63 Manning Cup championship, and I guess tired of just winning so easily or something. Coach Tompkinson went for a new challenge. He went to at that time, Veer Technical was just 3 years old. So he brought along with him Alan Skillcole, Kenneth Bob Campbell, later on Errol Barrett, Lloyd Macam Walker, Winston Earl, and in 1964, Alan was at Campion, but in 1965, he was at Veer. And was he ever at Veer? Remember, 1965, Alan is 14 most of that year, not turning 15 until October 1965. So Alan proceeds to lead the Da Costa Cup in scoring and lead Veer Technical to the Da Costa Cup title. 1966, unfortunately, Alan and other, almost as good or, very good players were robbed of an entire season because there was a violent confrontation between a bus driver and a supporter, not a player, not a coach, bus driver, supporter, violent confrontation, somebody got injured, and the school authorities abandoned the season from that point on. So Alan was robbed of that season. Not to worry, in 1967, there was the football was structured such that Colts was under 14 and then Manning Cup was under 19. And in between, there was no intermediate age group competition formally. And also in the summer, there was no structured soccer league or tournament for high school kids. So Keith Node and some other administrators of the game decided let's fill the gap between just above the Colts under 14. Let's fill that gap from 15 to 19 with an under 17 competition. And in order to not have the kids be too much into sports and playing too many games, let's have that competition be staged in the summer. So hence is the minor league. The minor league is under 17. In 1967, Keith Node recruited Don't ask me how. He recruited Undell Williams and Alan Skilcole for a Swallowfield minor league team. He also recruited Noel Ev Coach Thompson, center half, and Cool Bobby Coombs from Veer Technical, center half. And in goal was Glenford Luigi Davey, my brother, reuniting with Alan from Alpha Junior days. So Alan and Undell are up front, Noel F. Coach Thompson and Bobby Coombs at the defense, and Luigi in goal. That Swallowfield team was coached by none other than George Thompson. Remember, just a few years removed from the 64-65 all-conquering KC team, he is now coaching Alan and Undell in an under-17 competition. Needless to say, that team did exceptionally well. They got all the way to the finals. Unfortunately, in the finals, they were just barely edged out by a Campbelltown team that featured Milverton Brooks, Glenn Campbell, a former Alpha Junior standout. And I think the winning goal, the only goal, was scored by Michael Ashman. Now, from 67 through the present, Alan and I had minimal contact. In 1975, there was a celebratory event celebrating Bob Marley's birthday, and it was held at Howard University. I was a student then, and Alan came and was at the party. I think this was 1973, 74, and I had not seen or contacted Alan, been in contact with him since 67, Swallowfield, 73, 74. And then over the years, I would call him, I and some of my brothers who Alan knew well, and one of whom he played on the national team with a few games. So we would call Alan and wish him happy birthday on October 14th? October 14th, we'd call and wish him happy birthday. In 2016, Real Mona had their 50th year anniversary. I came down for it, and I saw Alan. Lennox was there, and we had a great time. We took some good pictures. When I find the pictures, I'll post it. About a year ago, a reporter called and asked if Alan Cole scored the most goals for the national team. So I said, I don't think so, because when Alan was playing, there were a few restrictive elements in the life of a soccer player in those days. One was there weren't so many games as there are now. Not too many international games were played when Alan was, say, 18, 19, 20. And incidentally, Alan's first performance for the national senior team was in 1966, and before October, so he was still 15, maybe 15 and a half. And I think that's still the youngest for any player to ever represent Jamaica at the national senior level. So back to the goal scoring for Jamaica. Some of the restrictions were, one, Alan had, well, in 1967, after minor league, let me jump back a little bit, Alan had signed a professional contract to play for the Atlanta Chiefs in the North American Soccer League. One of his teammates was Delroy Mutty Scott, who a Jamaican who was a Cavalier player. So Alan was a professional at 16, 17 years old. When some of the World Cup when some of the Olympic elimination games, when some of the Central American and Caribbean games were being played, there was an amateur professional rule. If you're an amateur and you haven't played and received compensation, you can engage in any sport, any soccer game at any level. If you were a professional, you could not engage in any Central American and Caribbean soccer games. you could not participate in any Olympic elimination games. And so during that time, Alan could not have been selected. And so a lot of opportunities for potentially scoring goals for the national senior team just went aside, just went a begging. Um, Moving on to the other restriction, and it was a cultural restriction. For some reason in the Jamaican society, the acceptance of certain religion and the acceptance of some of the physical characteristics of the indulges in certain religions were sort of restricted from representing the nation. And so during that time, even if there was a World Cup level, professional level, for that reason, Alan was not selected. So less opportunity to score. So Alan said, Mikey, I didn't score a lot of goals for Jamaica, maybe 4 or 5, because I didn't play a lot of international games for Jamaica. Now, Alan and my dad worked together at government printing office for decades. So we share beyond the school. Um, Alan and his dad would come to my house and we'd visit and have dinner. My dad would bring his tribe of kids over to Alan and we'd play football and have dinner. Those were vulnerable, innocent infant years. Although Alan and I tangled a few times beyond high school, me playing for Cavalier, Alan playing for Real Mona. Beyond that, we stayed close despite Alan's huge fame. He never let me feel that I was anything other than his alpha infant and primary school playmate. That humility will walk with you, Alan, as you trod through the next stage of your life. And as you get into that field, and as the brethren would say, as you get into the higher heights, please remember, you know, in the higher heights, you might need some oxygen tank. Because remember when you first went to Mexico City and the Jamaica team didn't have oxygen tank, the higher elevation might get to you. Last but not least, I think Alan had a league named after him from several years ago, probably a few decades. Now, I would like to leave with the powers that be. Hopefully this video gets to the powers that be. I'd like to request that the Stadium East field be officially named. I don't even think it has any official name other than Stadium East. I would recommend and request and hope and pray that the powers that be take whatever action is necessary to name that field the Alan Skill Cole soccer field or football complex. Anyway, that's all I have, and if you need a transcript of this, I will have my information forwarded to Alan's relative, and you can get it from them. Alan, rest in peace. I hope I did you justice by sharing some things with folks, apart from maybe Lennox Robinson and others, may not have even known that Alan trotted through these types of experiences. One love, my brethren.